Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Trail Mix, where the nuts might be a little stale, but the company is always fresh.
Is hearing how far the myth of Portland burning can stretch. Join the conversation right now at trailmix.cc/chat, where history doesn't repeat itself, it just live streams.
Decision from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which halts the deployment of National Guard troops to Portland, at least for now. So here's what happened. The Ninth Circuit agreed to rehear the case, essentially throwing out last week's split ruling by 3 judges that greenlit troops. Now, 11 judges will take another look, though there is no timeline for when that will happen. Meanwhile, the lawsuit at the center of all this, with Oregon and Portland fighting the Trump administration and looking for a permanent rather than temporary order over troops, is set to go to trial tomorrow. Alma McCarty spoke with a legal expert about what to expect. Alma?
Well, David, this trial, which is on an accelerated timeline, is going to drill down into the facts of what is happening on the ground and whether bringing in federalized troops is the correct response.
The way that I look at this is a systematic attempt by the president to really attack pillars of our democracy.
Attorney General Dan Rayfield speaking on the broader implication of a legal fight centered in the Rose City and around the ICE facility. The Trump administration's attempt to federalize Oregon's National Guard and deploy troops to Portland. A trial to challenge that begins Wednesday morning.
We're really focused on the case at hand this week to demonstrate to the court what are the real facts going on in Oregon to allow the judge to make an independent decision about the presidential power to put military on our streets.
The plaintiffs, including the state of Oregon and city of Portland, plan to call Portland police officers as witnesses. According to court documents, they're likely to detail how officers were caught up in, quote, federal law enforcement employing indiscriminate, excessive force against small crowds. Plaintiffs argue the feds' needless use of munitions at the ICE facility created an appearance of smoke, flashes of fire, and explosion, leading to more hyperbolic rhetoric from the president. They're arguing this is neither rebellion nor an inability to execute federal law, and troops aren't needed. The feds argue the opposite.
They actually think that what's been going on here can be viewed as a type of rebellion, and that peace and order are not able to be kept.
As defendants in the case, the federal government argues the president's call to send in troops was amply justified. Court documents cite assaults to federal officers, damaged federal property, plus the need to call in more officers, diverting them from other enforcement like immigration.
Although a lot of this is going to be a very factual basis, some of this will be arguing on the law.
Despite the 3-day trial, Professor Laura Appelman with Willamette University says this fight is far from over.
What will happen then is whoever does not succeed on the merits will then appeal that decision to the Ninth Circuit and then possibly also at some point to the Supreme Court.
And again, the trial is expected to take 3 days, and we don't know how soon the judge will rule. In the meantime, temporary restraining orders issued by the district court are still in place to block deployment. David?
Yeah, so bottom line, status quo, at least for now. Thanks, Alma.
In America, we don't use our United States military on our own citizens, but except in extreme circumstances. It's actually un-American, if you think about it, to use the military against our own citizens. But that's exactly what's happening right now across our country, from California to DC to Memphis to Illinois, and now to Portland. At 9:32 this morning, we received communication from the governor's office that the president had invoked Title 10 to deploy Oregon's National Guard to the city of Portland. The president is either purposefully ignoring the reality on the ground in Portland to score political points, or at best, is recklessly relying upon social media gossip. The president's actions today only serve to further divide us as a nation, as a community, under the guise of caring about public.
And welcome back to Straight Talk. We are continuing our conversation on the Trump administration's efforts to deploy the National Guard in Portland. We're joined now by Professor Tung Yin. Yin is a professor of law at the Lewis and Clark Law School. His area of expertise lies in national security and terrorism law. He is also the author of National Security Lies, a book that takes a magnifying glass to claims about national security issues made by presidents. Professor Yin, thank you so much for being here today.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Well, so much has happened over the last 48 hours. It's pretty wild. It's been a lot going on and a lot to follow. But on Saturday, Judge Immergut granted the temporary restraining order. And then the Trump administration deployed federalized troops from California to Oregon, even calling on Texas to deploy their guard. What was your take on the government's move yesterday as they tried to bring in troops from other areas?
I thought it was that they would argue they were complying with the strict letter of Judge Immergut's ruling, which seemed to be applying only to the Oregon National Guard, although clearly it also seemed to be violating the spirit of her ruling. But I take it in the emergency hearing last night, the judge felt that no, that it was actually violating the letter of her ruling as well.
Were you surprised by these moves by the Trump administration over the weekend?
Surprised that they would try to do an end run around. I guess not, because we've seen that this administration is very aggressive about testing the limits of judicial rulings and sometimes arguably even flouting some of them.
I want to ask about that hearing you mentioned last night. I listened in on the hearing. At the start of questioning, Judge Immergut said to the defending attorney for the government, quote, "How is this not in direct opposition of the TRO I granted yesterday?" Went on to say, "Is the defendant, the president, simply circumventing my order?" She seemed very frustrated by the Justice Department's move. Is this an unprecedented move?
If you take a very abstract approach, is it unprecedented for an administration or president to say, okay, there's a ruling that says I can't do something, I'm going to try a different way of doing it? I think at that level of abstraction, it's not unusual. But in this particular case, when we're dealing with what is essentially the same group of troops where a judge has said, there's no call for troops in the state. I think that's how the judge really interpreted her own order, that there's no conditions that would justify bringing any nationalized federal troops here. And so in that sense, I guess it is sort of, I don't want to warrant that it's never happened, but let's say extremely unusual.
So in an emergency hearing last night, as we mentioned, the judge granted that second restraining order, which broadens now her first TRO to block all National Guard troops from coming to Portland. Now, we know the federal government has appealed the first order and stated in the hearing last night they do plan to appeal this second one as well. So what happens next here? I know they're going to appeal it to the Ninth Circuit Court. What happens next, and what's the timeline?
So normally with appeals, you actually have to wait until the end of the entire litigation at the trial level. So that's so that you don't have piecemeal appeals. Everything just gets resolved all at once. But there is a procedure for, we call it interlocutory appeal, but it just means in the middle of the litigation, where it's not you guaranteed you can do this. It's up to the Ninth Circuit to decide whether it wants to take the case, the appeal, this particular issue now, or wait. But as part of that, I gather what the administration really wants is a stay of the district judge's TRO. And so if the Ninth Circuit decides that it will take this matter right now, it could grant a stay of the TRO fairly quickly, and then proceed with sort of like a more normal briefing schedule.
So if they did grant a stay, that could happen in the next few days?
It could, yes.
Okay. And then would that mean that we'd see troops on the ground very shortly after?
Yes, I think this is similar to what happened down in California, where the district judge there granted a preliminary injunction. So that's again not permanent, but it's longer than the TRO. The government appeal, Ninth Circuit, is still working through the appeal of the case, but stayed the injunction. So that's why the California troops could be nationalized without violating a court order.
I see. So as we await the appeal, or what will happen with that, does President Trump have a way to send the military here instead of National Guard?
Well, so that would not run afoul of Judge Immergut's ruling, at least the letter of the ruling, which again applies to any nationalized National Guard. And if instead the president would be sending active duty military personnel, that would be triggered not under the Title 10, Section 12406. That's the statute that's at issue of this whole nationalization. Instead, it would be something different. The only question I have is that Judge Immergut based her ruling partly on the 10th Amendment, which says that it's basically a states' rights amendment, part of the Constitution. So I wonder if that would be enough for her to say, look, this is infringing on Oregon's right to maintain law and order. If you're sending the troops here to fight off an invading force, yes, okay, that's what the military is for. If you're sending them to fight off a civil war, okay, yes. But if it's just to maintain law and order, that's really the job of the states.
Okay, Professor Yin, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate your time today.
Of course.
And thank
right now. And today's ruling is an important wake-up call for the United States president. No president is allowed to make up facts or rely on social media trolling or posts when deploying the United States military in our cities. It's an incredibly dangerous precedent to set in America. And today's ruling halts what appears to be the president's attempt to normalize the United States military in our cities. Yesterday, staff and attorneys at the Oregon Department of Justice presented facts to the court that the president had not met the standards required by Congress to federalize the National Guard.
Today's decision reaffirms what we've long maintained: the federal government overstepped its authority. As the judge noted in her decision, we provided substantial evidence that the protests at the Portland ICE facility were not significantly violent or disruptive in the days or even the weeks leading up to the president's directive on September 27.
I appointed the judge, and he goes like that. So I wasn't served well. Obviously, I don't know the judge, but if he made that kind of a decision, Portland is burning to the ground.
Okay, A, Judge Immergut is a she, and B, she has been in Oregon's legal circles for a long time. So what do folks who know her say about that ruling?
Well, and what is so interesting is that Immergut was appointed by Trump to become a federal judge during the president's first term. I spoke to people who have known her for decades, and really many recognized her as really not someone who is even remotely political, extremely intelligent, very hardworking, and just had really spent huge parts of her career as a prosecutor, in fact, very deeply concerned about public safety. I spoke with law enforcement and defense attorneys, former colleagues. One of them was former Oregon U.S. Attorney Billy Williams, who was also appointed by Trump during Trump's first term. And Williams and Immergut worked together long ago, both as state and federal prosecutors.
She's not left or right or anything. She's where she needs to be, which is what are the facts and what's the law? What's the right thing to do?
And that sentiment from Williams was echoed by just so many people I spoke with. The idea that Immergut is anything but a political person. I mean, she has been a registered Republican for a long time. In the 90s, she was a registered Democrat briefly. And in July of this year, she became a non-affiliated voter. Lori Levinson is a law professor at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And actually, she got to know Immergut well in the late 1980s when Levinson ran she called it Rookie Row, It was at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, where kind of she was the training person for new federal prosecutors. And so she's known Immergut for now decades and large kind of watched her career take off. And this is what Levinson said about Immergut.
I mean, she's a real professional, and she's going to follow the law and follow the facts where they lead her. And even though she's a Trump appointee, I don't think anybody knows her, that she would be swayed by her appointment or the politics in making her decision.
Okay, obviously an independent voice to those who know her. What else did you learn about her background that stood out?
Well, before she was a federal judge, she was also a state court judge in Multnomah County, and it was also Oregon's U.S. attorney under George W. Bush, and a prosecutor in Multnomah County. Her parents immigrated to the U.S. She grew up speaking Swedish, she said, in this Oregon Bar Association kind of article about her from several years ago. Her dad was Austrian and fled the Nazis, and she said that her parents wanted her to study science. One of the more kind of notable things that stood out from her background is in the 1990s, she investigated Democratic President Bill Clinton, part of Ken Starr's team. She actually did Monica Lewinsky's deposition. And in his memoir, Ken Starr recalled Immergut's insistence on including some explicit details in their report that contradicted the president's claim that he had no sexual relationship with Lewinsky. And then decades later, now as a federal judge, Immergut oversaw this huge trial a couple of years ago here in Portland involving Measure 114. That's the state gun control measure. I actually got to sit through that, and it was an amazing trial where historians and gun experts came and testified over the course of a week and really developed this incredible record of just sort of firearms regulations at the time of the Revolutionary War. And it was just like an impressive thing to watch, a judge preside over this really complicated trial. And she actually ultimately ruled against sheriffs that were challenging the measure and upheld it under the U.S. Constitution.
Okay, well, let's look ahead to the Ninth Circuit. They've got this hearing scheduled for Thursday about these rulings from Judge Immergut. Any sense of when we might get a decision from them?
It's hard to predict these kind of things. Regardless, the underlying legal issues in the case, about presidential powers, about the ability to federalize a state's National Guard over, a governor's objections and sort of the legal authority questions raised here, states' rights versus, federal law. These are all sort of really big questions that are not going to be something the Ninth Circuit's looking at. What they're just going to be looking at is really, can a judge, is there the authority to block temporarily the administration, whether the administration must be stopped or can be stopped, before they consider the larger legal questions raised in this lawsuit that will continue regardless of whatever the decision is.
Portland is burning to the ground. It's insurrection. It's Antifa, and yet the politicians who are petrified. Look, the politicians are afraid for their lives. That's the only reason that they say, like, there's nothing happening. And you've seen it. The place is burning down, and they pretend like there's nothing happening. So we'll take a look at the order. We haven't seen the order yet. Well, I disagree with that, Judge. I wasn't served well if they put judges like that on. I wasn't served well by the people that pick judges, I can tell you. Things like that are just too bad. I appointed the judge, and he goes like that. So I wasn't served well. Obviously, I don't know the judge. But if he made that kind of a decision, Portland is burning to the ground. You have agitators, insurrectionists. All you have to do is look at the television, turn on your television, read your newspapers. It's burning to the ground. The governor, the mayor, the politicians are petrified for their lives. And you have a judge like that, he ought to be that judge ought to be ashamed of himself.
That room is open. Bring your tech. Trump's troop plan keeps losing in court. Oregon said no. The Ninth Circuit said try again. And today, a federal judge is hearing how far the myth of Portland burning can stretch. Join the conversation right now at trailmix.cc/chat, where history doesn't repeat itself. It just live streams. get a load of this. We got a trial going on today, right now, as a matter of fact. Unfortunately, it's in federal court, so it's not going to be live streamed, although I'm tracking some of the coverage. What's at issue here in Portland is the president's claim that it's burning to the ground, as you just heard in that clip of his. And there's just no proof of that. This is coming out more and more. And even the Justice Department is having to admit, because when they go into court, they can only fudge so much. They can't outright lie. And they had been saying some things about what was happening in Portland to justify these troop deployments that just weren't true. And we know now for sure they weren't true because they're admitting they weren't true. This letter right here, the Justice Department wrote to the court just a couple of days ago, acknowledging that some of the facts, or what they had claimed to be facts, just weren't true. And the local coverage in Portland on this particular aspect of the case has been a little bit thin, although it just happened. So I think they're just now dealing with it. But there's some bloggers out there in Oregon who are tracking this stuff. And I thought this guy did a nice job of summing up this particular situation.
Portland National Guard update. The Department of Justice made a major error in their evidence used to support Trump's deployment of the Guard to Portland. Officials claimed that 115 Federal Protective Services agents were sent to Portland between June and September. However, the legal teams in Portland and Oregon determined that there was never more than 31 FPS agents in the city. In total, 86 officers were sent, but the number was never over 31 at any given time. This has the potential to hurt the Trump administration's legal case because the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals used this as evidence to suggest that Trump could not uphold the United States laws with regular forces. This evidence that has now been walked back was cited repeatedly in court filings and oral hearings. The DOJ still wants the Ninth Circuit's ruling upheld, but we'll have to wait and see where things go, so please follow me to stay updated on this.
That guy did a good job of what was a pretty amazing development in the case, and one that ought to get more national attention, I think, is the federal government is admitting in these National Guard cases, at least this one in Portland, that they just overstated the whole situation. Now, we can argue about what the motivation for that was, but the point is, Portland hasn't seen serious protests for weeks now, and yet the administration is still in court trying to argue that. Look at this! Look at this! Let me put this little photo on the screen. If I can figure out where it went. Yeah, right here. Right there is what things look like this morning at the ICE facility, where this is all the subject about. This is where Trump is claiming Portland is burning to the ground, justifying National Guard troops from several states to basically invade Portland. And that's what it looked like this morning, and what it's pretty much been looking like for several days now. It's just not the scene that they say. And then you look here, this is what happened some time ago, not too long ago. This is the federal police pepper spraying what they thought was a protester, but was actually a local policeman. That's coming up in the trial today, as a matter of fact. But the most recent development, other than this trial going on right now, is what we've got here is the Ninth Circuit. All right, the appeals court. It's the largest circuit in the country, and they've been looking at this case, and they made a decision that the entire court, not all 29, but something like 16 or so of them, are going to review this whole question of whether Trump can take over the Oregon National Guard. And so what's happening is the lower court opinion that Trump can deploy the National Guard in Portland. It was a 3-judge panel, 2 of them Trump appointees, had overruled the judge who had issued the restraining order on using the National Guard in Portland. Well, they did that a few days ago, and then Friday we learned from the Ninth Circuit that they stayed that. In other words, they kept the restraining order preventing the National Guard in Portland in place. And then last night, just last night, we got a report on what their deal is on that.
And quite literally, the judges voted to hear the case en banc. That means a panel of 11 judges will hear the case of whether a temporary restraining order on the deployment of the National Guard was proper or not. So in short, what this means is that the National Guards cannot be deployed into Portland until that issue is decided. Like I said, that's going to be a panel of 11 judges who are going to hear whether a temporary restraining order, that is a pause on the deployment, was proper.
So that's where things stand right now in Portland. No National Guard allowed. And pending what this Ninth Circuit full court or mostly full court decides, that's how it's going to stay for now. Bottom line is, around the country, Trump's not doing well with these National Guard cases. He's won a lot of delays and a lot of reconsiderations, but every court that's looked at the actual merits of his decision to deploy National Guard for basically turning soldiers into cops, every court that's ruled on the actual merits of that issue has ruled against him, and the appellate courts have muddied the waters. In some cases, they've stayed those orders, but not that many. And in other cases, they've, as we're seeing in Oregon, they've allowed the restraining orders to stay in effect. But overall, I would say this is a failing project in terms of the courts. And now none of this has gotten to the Supreme Court, of course, and that's going to be the thing that ultimately matters the most. But let's go back to what this federal judge did. And the judge we're talking about here, by the way, was appointed by Trump, was a longtime prosecutor with a real strong praise from law enforcement that she was a tough prosecutor and a successful prosecutor. And one interesting bit of detail is she's a Republican who actually worked for Kenneth Starr back in the Bill Clinton investigation and was the lead prosecutor who questioned Monica Lewinsky. So this is no lefty that, like I keep hearing from the MAGA people in comments on my videos and whatnot. This judge who ordered the restraining order preventing National Guard in Portland is no such thing. But anyway, here's the story.
A federal
on
judge
her.
has blocked the Trump administration from sending the National Guard into Portland. The White House is planning to appeal. Now, in her opinion, the judge described recent clashes between protesters and federal officers as inexcusable. Oregon's Attorney General agrees.
Mobilizing the United States military in our cities is not normal. It should not be normal, and we will fight to make sure that it is never normal. Today's ruling is a healthy check on the president's power, and as the president, you must have in actual facts
based on reality, not social media or just your gut feeling, if you want to mobilize the military here in the United States.
For more on the judge's ruling and what's next for Portland, here's CNN's Julia Vargas Jones. Julia.
Now we're going back 2 or 3 weeks in time here. This is the original order that is currently at issue in Oregon. The federal judge, Trump appointee, longtime Republican and tough prosecutor in her background, she ordered that Trump cannot deploy National Guard into Oregon.
Victor, what this decision is doing is basically pressing pause on the deployment of the National Guard to Oregon. The question that the judge, Karen Immergut, a Trump appointee, I should add, had to answer was this an overreach by the federal government to federalize the National Guard? In the complaint, both the state of Oregon and the city of Portland had called this deployment unlawful and unwarranted, but there were 3 basic pillars that her decision was based on. One of them is Section 12406 of the U.S. Code. It says basically that the president exceeded his authority here and that he did not prove that he was, quote, unable with regular forces to execute the laws there. A second one is the concept of rebellion. The standard for rebellion here was not met. She said that the protests were recently small and mostly peaceful. There were some sporadic incidents, but it wasn't an organized and armed rebellion as the federal government was using to justify this deployment. And thirdly, the conflict with the 10th Amendment. She said that this federalization of the National Guard would be invading the state's sovereignty. And then she talked even further about how unwarranted this was, citing the positions from local law enforcement in Portland, saying that in recent weeks, there were about 20 people, give or take, at these protests. There was minimal activity, and the regular forces in Portland itself would have been able to handle this very well. Now, what's notable here is when the judge got into talking about the history of the United States and military power. She said, quote, "This country has a long-standing and foundational tradition of resistance to government overreach, especially in the form of military intrusion into civil affairs." She says the U.S. is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law, and that, quote, defendants, so this is the federal government, have made a range of arguments that, if accepted, risk blurring the line between civil and military federal power to the detriment of this nation. Now, Victor, this decision is only good for 14 days, and the court will contact all parties on October 17th to see if there is a need for an extension. Victor?
All right, Julia, thank you.
And there's the whole question of what is happening on the ground in Portland. Got a story over here I was just reading a little earlier on that, and we've got the trial that's going on right now as we speak, as a matter of fact, and the judge that they were just talking about who did that order is right now holding this trial, and it's going to pour over the evidence and the witness testimony on the various claims of the administration that the police had collapsed in Portland and could not enforce law and order, and that was the whole reason for the National Guard coming in. I have a feeling this is going to be a pretty embarrassing trial for the federal government because, as they themselves have admitted, much of their support for that claim was false, and they wrote in a letter, this letter, as a matter of fact, to the court saying that it was false. So they can't prove their case is what it amounts to. And if they ever get around to it, we'll see, but I don't think they're going to. And meanwhile, we see what's happening on the ground.
Protests this weekend once again had demonstrators outside of the ICE facility in South Portland. This video appears to show a Department of Homeland Security officer speaking with.
Now look at this. This is what we keep seeing in Portland is video of a lot more law enforcement than protesters, and protesters not really doing a whole lot, but getting agitated by the cops themselves. Listen to this story. This is just in the last day or two.
One of the protesters before pulling them over that blue line on the ground. Other officers then jump in and arrest that protester. It's not clear why the protester was arrested, but we've reached out to ICE and DHS for details. So far, we've only heard from ICE, and they said it was not one of their guys in that video. Portland police said they made 3 other arrests near the ICE facility yesterday. The arrests include 2 brothers from New Jersey for second-degree disorderly conduct. Police say they repeatedly walked into traffic lanes on South Bancroft Street. Then later, officers saw someone pushing another person, and they arrested that person for harassment. Portland police have arrested a total of 58 people related to the nightly protests since June.
And President Trump has portrayed this as something so far removed from what's actually happening on the ground.
Federal law. These are all
So
sort of
let's,
really big questions that are not.
Let's take a look at that
Looking at
before we wrap this up. Here's what starts it all.
To block.
This is what it all goes back to, is what he's claiming right here.
Portland is burning to the ground. It's insurrection. It's Antifa, and yet the politicians who are petrified. Look, the politicians are afraid for their lives. That's the only reason that they say, like, there's nothing happening. And you've seen it. The place is burning down, and they pretend like there's nothing happening. So we'll take a look at the order. We haven't seen the order yet. Well, I disagree with that, Judge. I wasn't served well if they put judges like that on. I wasn't served well by the people that pick judges, I can tell you. Things like that are just too bad. I appointed the judge, and he goes like that. So I wasn't served well. Obviously, I don't know the judge, but if he made that kind of a decision, Portland is burning to the ground. You have agitators, insurrectionists. All you have to do is look at the television, turn on your television, read your newspapers. It's burning to the ground. The governor, the mayor, the politicians are petrified for their lives. And you have a judge like that, he ought to be that judge ought to be ashamed of him.
That judge is a woman. He kept referring to the judge as a he. But this is where we are. We got a president who's just making up stuff in order to flex his power and order military into a city. And that's what the courts are wrestling with. They've been treading water a bit, going this way, going that way, but you can really sense a consensus building, particularly with this Ninth Circuit, the largest federal circuit in the country, deciding last night that they're going to get about 15 or 16 of their brethren together and look at this whole thing and make a decision. And of course, at some point, it goes to the Supreme Court, which it has not, and that has not happened yet. So we'll be coming back to this many times, I'm sure, because this is what we're looking at in cities like Portland, is federal agents and military ordered into cities to, in my opinion, start violence and not control it in the least.
Okay, I'm Lady Mau Mau, Craig's built-in emergency brake. If this wasn't enough for you, sign up for the newsletter. It's free, it's thoughtful, and it occasionally makes sense.